Haidong. In this video, we're going to talk about the application of the around the world. So the combination in question is a very popular one in Bankuk, especially. So Bankuk and Jenbaek, and who knows, maybe a little bit further than that, all use this combination pretty consistently. So it uses a stance that we use even from our basics, right? So we use our Gungai Dongyip Palsungse. We're going to land doing a shortcut, full cut. With other parts of the form, right? So in Bankuk 4, for example, we're going to land as we cut, and then we prepare to do a very extensive chasing down sequence. This is also a combination that pops up in Bankuk 7, right? Where we have something a little more robust, right? So we're here, we land as we you have these really big arcing motions later. So, so if you were like me, you might be wondering, why does this happen, right? So if we start thinking about the distances involved, it starts to break down pretty quickly, at least on the surface level. Because I like transparency, so I'm calling this the around the world because I heard Chief Master Jenko call it that. So shout out to Chief Master Jenko in Pittsburgh. But let's talk about the distances involved in this combination, and also like a recurring idea in a lot of the Palsungse as well as the left version of the Palsungse. So first, a very brief, we can talk about this maybe in a future video, but a major idea to keep in mind as we're using our Palsungse specifically. So we're not necessarily talking about the Gungai Dongyip Palsungse, right? Just this guard. The idea is you want to be able to strike directly from here, right? So you don't want to be like facing your target, cock it back, and strike, right? You want to be able from here, just go straight into a strike pretty effectively, right? Hence why the Palsungse is a little bit higher, right? As opposed to some other styles like in Yaido, for example, which has a much more lower forward guard here. The Palsungse that we use is much higher, right? So it's about the jaw level for the guard. So you can actually just bring it straight down with a pretty solid strike. But that said, right? So even with that short strike, because we're expecting it to be a short strike, so we're not expecting from here, cock it back, and then wapan, following through, right? The idea is if I am actually going to be hitting this person, right? Imagine this is the body of the person, right? Because they're going to have a sword, right? So if we're here, I'm close enough to strike with sufficient force to hurt them, right? If I try to spin forward again into whatever combination, there's a problem. Another problem is, obviously, they're swordsmen, so you can imagine, right? So with that sword involved, if I am actually striking them, I would need to be much closer. I'm already in their distance in order to do a shortcut, which obviously, you know, not begs the question, but the logical next step would be, okay, your sword's in the way, I'm gonna hit your sword out of the way, and then maybe my next strike will hit you. Let's take a look, right? So this will be about decent distance, right? Like if they are facing me with their own sword, right? So with that distance, right, so keep that in mind as I'm up here. If I land, strike the sword out of the way, right? If I'm spinning into them, I can maybe do, notice that I'm going to be hitting with this portion of the sword, which is not a good cutting portion, right? It would bludgeon them, certainly. For me, like with that distance, if you want to, you could strike pommel, right? Not dissimilar to what we do in Shimsong, right? But as is, the around the world doesn't make sense, right? So from this distance, if we're here, strike, first of all, be really close on them, their sword is not that far off, right? So I probably will be running into probably their short sword, right? Or the strong of the sword, right? So if they were deflected, they can still easily come back to defend themselves, right? So spinning straight on, even if I have a very small spin, right? Which isn't necessarily what happens in the form. In the form, it's not a large step, but it's enough to get some momentum going. So if we're here, even if I dial that spin really, really tiny, right? Okay, that might work, but notice how much effort went into the spin, and it didn't help me generate any more power, right? So one idea with spins is that it should allegedly give you more power, at least if you're doing like a diagonal crosscut or something like that, right? So one thing, right? So when I was going through this and kind of figuring out like what makes sense for me, one thing would be like, okay, well, you're never gonna spin straight into someone because first of all, you expose your back the entire time and they can just stab you and that's bad, right? So one thing might be like, okay, there's swords in the way, right? I'm gonna hit it, not dissimilar to how we do a hit in Saints 11 where you just smack and full strike, right? So if we're here and I strike it, maybe if I go off to the side, because if the sword is off to the side, right, that means this part's open. Their tip is over there. Here, right? So is that safer? Yes. Is it more powerful? No, right? So to make it a little more sense, I'm gonna actually face sort of you. So if I'm here, right? If I strike, spin through, my power is here. I can still twist the strike this way if I want to, but it's not that strong. So the logical next step would be, all right, my diagonal is going to be powerful here, especially with that spin, go that way. So if we're here, they have their sword out, whack, spin through, fall through. So does this make sense in terms of, you know, what happens in the form, right? So in saying in Bankuk 4, yeah, actually, right? So if we are off fighting this person, we strike the sword out of the way. I'm moving off to the side here, aiming here, following through. I'm running past them, and eventually actually checking behind me to make sure that I'm still engaging with them later, right? So that makes sense. So let me show you from this angle so you can kind of get potentially a better idea. Hopefully it won't be too weird. So if we're here, I would hit more or less center, but notice my foot is going slightly to the left already. Follow through, strike, and then do your happy little Bankuk snippy snip, right? That's my idea so far. Now, if you're like me and you've seen a certain combination that I won't name because that might get me in trouble, but you would know the combination if I mean it, if you saw it. That being, so we're here, diagonal cross, cross. Okay, those two crosscuts really are annoying, right? So especially if you don't have a partner, you're like, all right, so I'm, and then you kind of like, right? Seems very weird. It doesn't seem like it would make too much sense in an actual fight, but because it's very similar to, again, the around the world, because you have that land and then some other move, let's see if we can make that make sense here. Spoiler, it actually makes annoyingly good sense. So if I'm here, right, again, noticing that's probably about a good distance, I'm here, I'm hitting. So normally, right, it'll be hit diagonal. If I want to do some from Bankuk 7, I can reach a little bit more if I want to. Makes good sense. Makes a pretty heavy hit. That annoying combination that will be from undisclosed form, right? From here, hit, crosscut, fall through, crosscut, whoops, and up. Make sense? So that double cross actually, double cross, actually makes some sense there if you're not aiming straight forward, right? So a little bit faster, right? So 1, 3, and I keep on hitting it on the reverse end, but that double pop, pop, because think about what they would be doing, right? So yes, if I'm hitting it this way, I'm kind of spinning towards their tip, which is a bad idea, but this is the best we have, right? If I'm here, I'm cross-cutting, right? So their sword we dropped, they can definitely do something to block the first cross-cut because it's very telegraphed, right? I'm here, prepare, they're gonna block it, I mean they're about here, and from that angle, this is actually gonna be open very nicely, right? Even if they do, even if they got hit here, it kind of like twists down to block that crosscut, they're still gonna be open. Right, so from here, 1, cross, cross, because you can actually have a double cut pretty effectively if you train with it. So yeah, so hopefully that makes sense. It was just something that I was working on because I was frustrated with my initial understanding with it. So hopefully this makes hopefully a little bit more sense than potentially what was floating around in ether. But I hope that you enjoy it, play with it, see what's wrong with it. Obviously there's going to be quite a few things because if you think about the geometry, right, so the sword tip would still be on the side, you'd be spinning into the sword, which is never really a good idea. But at the very least, you'd be able to get some good power if you really whack and spin full cut. So hopefully that makes some sense. Hopefully you enjoy this kind of thing. So make sure you stay safe, stay humble, and keep training. Haidong!